The day I signed the papers to buy the old gas station was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. Instead, it became the day my family decided I had officially lost my mind. I still remember standing outside the property after the previous owner handed me the keys. The station sat on the edge of town, beside a lonely two-lane highway. The faded sign leaned slightly to one side. Two of the fuel pumps looked older than I was. The convenience store windows were dusty, and the parking lot was covered with cracks and weeds. To most people, it looked abandoned. To my family, it looked like proof that I was a hopeless failure. To me, it looked like an opportunity. I had spent nearly 10 years saving every dollar I could. While my friends traveled, bought new cars, and spent money on entertainment, I worked overtime shifts and lived in a tiny apartment. Every paycheck went into savings, every bonus went into savings, every sacrifice had one purpose. I wanted to own a business. Not inherit one, not borrow one, own one. When the gas station came up for sale, something about it caught my attention. Most investors ignored it because it needed repairs and wasn't making much money. But I noticed something different. The location. Thousands of vehicles passed by every week. A new housing development was being discussed a few miles away. The highway connected several growing communities. I couldn't explain it. I just felt that the property had potential. So I took the biggest risk of my life. I emptied my savings account, every single dollar. When I told my family, their reaction was immediate. My mother stared at me as if I had confessed to a crime. "You spent everything on a gas station?" she asked. "Yes, the old one outside town. Yes." She shook her head slowly. "Oh, Daniel, that was never a good sign." My father was even less supportive. He folded his arms and looked at me with disappointment. "You worked 10 years for that money. I know. And now it's gone. It's invested. It's gone." He repeated. My older brother, Michael, laughed. Actually laughed. "You could have bought stocks. I know. You could have bought a house. I know. You could have started almost any business. I know. Instead, you bought a dying gas station." The rest of the family joined the conversation. An uncle called it financial suicide. A cousin said I would be bankrupt within a year. Someone asked whether I had suffered a head injury. The jokes kept coming. Each one landed harder than the last. I smiled through most of it because arguing wouldn't change anything. Nobody believed in the station. Nobody believed in me. A week later, the entire family gathered for my grandmother's birthday dinner. I knew my purchase would become the topic of discussion. I just didn't know how cruel people could be. The conversation started harmlessly. Then one relative asked how business was going. Before I could answer, Michael smirked. "Ask him again in 6 months." Several people laughed. I forced a smile. "It's going fine, fine." Michael said, "The place looks like it belongs in a disaster movie." More laughter. I stared at my plate. My father cleared his throat. For a moment I thought he might defend me. Instead, he said something that stayed with me for years. "Sometimes people need to learn from their mistakes." The room went quiet. I looked at him. "What does that mean?" He sighed. "It means you're chasing dreams instead of reality." The words hit harder than any joke because they came from him. My father had always been the person whose opinion mattered most. I wanted him to be proud of me. Instead, he looked embarrassed. "As your father," he continued, "I worry that you've thrown your future away." I felt every eye in the room watching me. Nobody spoke. Nobody defended me. Then he delivered the sentence that would replay in my head for years. "Honestly, Daniel, this might be the most irresponsible thing you've ever done." The silence afterward felt unbearable. I nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right." The dinner moved on, but something inside me changed that night. For the first time, I realized I was completely alone. If the station failed, nobody would help me. Nobody would rescue me. Nobody believed I could succeed. The next morning, I arrived at the station before sunrise. The building looked even worse in daylight. The roof leaked. The shelves were outdated. The parking lot needed repairs. The refrigerators made strange noises. One fuel pump stopped working every few days. It was a mess. My mess. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The smell of old coffee and dust filled the air. For a few seconds, doubt crept into my mind. Maybe my family was right. Maybe I had made the worst mistake of my life. Maybe I had wasted 10 years of savings. Maybe I was exactly what they thought I was, a failure. I stood there alone in the empty store. Then I looked around again, past the broken equipment, past the peeling paint, past the problems. I saw possibility. I saw customers. I saw growth. I saw a future nobody else could see. The station wasn't successful yet. But it could be. That was enough. I grabbed a broom and started cleaning, one aisle, then another, then another. By noon, I was covered in sweat. By evening, my back hurt. By closing time, I was exhausted, but for the first time all day, I smiled. The station looked slightly better than it had that morning. Not perfect, not impressive, just better. And that was how my journey began. Not with applause, not with support, not with encouragement. It began with ridicule, disappointment, and doubt. My family saw a hopeless failure standing behind a rundown gas station. What they didn't realize was that every insult they threw at me was becoming fuel. Fuel for determination, fuel for persistence, fuel for success. I didn't know it then, but the very business they mocked would one day change my life forever. And the people who laughed the loudest would eventually become the ones left speechless. The first year of owning the gas station nearly broke me. Not financially, emotionally. Every morning I arrived before sunrise, and every night I left long after dark. There were no employees except a part-time cashier I could barely afford. Most days, I cleaned the store, stocked shelves, repaired equipment, handled paperwork, and worked the register myself. There were no weekends, no vacations, no days off. If something broke, I fixed it. If supplies needed ordering, I ordered them. If customers complained, I listened. The station had become my entire life, and despite all my effort, success didn't come quickly. Some days I earned less than I had made working my old job. There were nights when I sat alone in the office staring at bills, wondering if my family had been right all along. One rainy evening, the oldest fuel pump stopped working completely. The repair estimate was nearly $3,000. $3,000 I didn't have. I remember sitting at my desk with my head in my hands. The station's account balance was dangerously low. My personal savings were gone. Every dollar I earned went back into the business. For the first time, fear truly set in. Not fear of hard work, fear of failure. I imagined having to sell the station. I imagined telling everyone they had been right. I imagined the look on my brother Michael's face. The thought alone made me sick. So instead of quitting, I found another solution. I worked even harder. I started taking small repair jobs for local businesses during evenings. I delivered supplies on weekends. I slept less and worked more. Exhaustion became normal. Months turned into years. Slowly, things began to improve. Not dramatically, just enough to keep moving forward. I painted the building myself. I repaired shelves. I upgraded lighting. I replaced damaged signs. Every improvement was small, but customers noticed. People started complimenting the cleanliness of the store. Truck drivers began stopping regularly. Local residents learned my name. Unlike the large chain stations nearby, I treated every customer like a neighbor. If someone needed directions, I helped. If an elderly customer struggled with heavy purchases, I carried them outside. If travelers needed recommendations, I gave them honest advice. Word spread. Little by little, business grew. Unfortunately, my family's attitude didn't. At every holiday gathering, someone found a way to remind me that I wasn't successful. Especially Michael. By then, my older brother had climbed the corporate ladder. He drove a luxury SUV. He wore expensive watches. He posted photos online from fancy restaurants and vacations. Compared to him, I looked like a man stuck in place. One Thanksgiving dinner, Michael couldn't resist taking another shot at me. "So, how's the gas station empire?" he asked sarcastically. Several relatives chuckled. "It's doing okay." I replied, "Okay isn't exactly success." I ignored him. But he kept going. "You know, if you had invested that money instead of buying that station, you'd probably be much better off today." My father nodded. "I've said the same thing." The familiar disappointment returned. 3 years had passed, 3 years, and they still treated me like a reckless child. No matter how hard I worked, nothing changed their opinion. To them, I wasn't a business owner. I was the family failure. That night, I drove back to the station feeling more frustrated than ever. The store was closed. The parking lot was empty. I sat on the hood of my truck and stared at the building. For a moment, I wondered why I kept fighting. Nobody seemed to notice my sacrifices. Nobody acknowledged the progress. Nobody cared how hard I worked. Then I remembered something my grandfather once told me when I was young. Most people quit right before things start getting better. At the time, I hadn't understood what he meant. Now I did. Success wasn't glamorous. It wasn't instant. It was lonely, very lonely. The next morning, I got up and went back to work. Just like always, by the 4th year, the station looked completely different from the property I had purchased. The store was cleaner. The pumps worked reliably. The inventory had expanded. Revenue was steadily increasing. Nothing extraordinary, but enough to survive. And survival was an accomplishment nobody could take away from me. Then something unexpected happened. Developers began buying land near the highway. At first, I didn't pay much attention. Land sales weren't unusual, but over the following months, construction projects started appearing everywhere. New neighborhoods, new shopping centers, new businesses. The area around my station was changing, fast. One afternoon, a real estate agent stopped by. After filling his vehicle, he walked inside and asked an unusual question. "Have you ever considered selling?" I laughed, "No." He smiled. "Smart decision." Before leaving, he glanced around the property. "This location is going to be worth a fortune someday." His words stayed with me. A fortune? Nobody had ever described my gas station that way. Especially not my family. I began researching development plans more closely. The more I learned, the more excited I became. Population growth was accelerating. Traffic numbers were increasing every year. Major infrastructure improvements were being discussed. For the first time since buying the station, I felt something stronger than determination. Hope, real hope. Not because success was guaranteed, but because the future finally seemed to be moving in my direction. I didn't tell my family. There was no point. They would dismiss it like they dismissed everything else. Instead, I kept working, kept improving, kept believing. What I didn't realize was that the biggest change of all was still coming. A single announcement would soon transform everything. The same station everyone called a mistake. The same property they mocked for years. The same business that supposedly ruined my future. It was about to become the foundation of a fortune. And when that happened, the people who had spent years laughing at me would suddenly remember my phone number. 5 years after buying the gas station, I was standing behind the register on an ordinary Tuesday morning when everything changed. At the time, I didn't know it. I was simply restocking a shelf of bottled drinks when my phone began vibrating nonstop. Text messages, calls, notifications. At first, I ignored them. The morning rush had just started, and customers were lining up to pay. But after my phone buzzed for the 10th time, I finally checked it. The first message came from an old friend. "Turn on the news now." The second said, "Congratulations, you're going to be rich." The third simply read, "You were right." My heart started racing. I opened a local news website. The headline nearly made me drop my phone. A massive highway expansion project had just been approved. The new route would connect several rapidly growing communities and direct thousands of additional vehicles through the exact intersection where my gas station stood. My intersection, my property, my station. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I reread the article 3 times, then 4, then 5. The words didn't change. The project was real. The plans were official. And my small gas station was suddenly sitting on one of the most valuable commercial locations in the region. I leaned against the counter and stared out the window. The same road my family had mocked for being too empty. The same location they called the middle of nowhere. The same property they said would bankrupt me. It wasn't the middle of nowhere anymore. It was becoming the center of everything. Over the following months, traffic increased dramatically. Construction crews filled the area. Workers stopped for fuel, snacks, coffee, and supplies. Sales climbed every single week, then every month, then every quarter. For the first time since buying the station, I wasn't fighting just to survive. I was growing, rapidly. The extra income allowed me to make improvements I had only dreamed about before. I installed modern fuel pumps. I expanded the convenience store. I upgraded the refrigeration systems. I renovated the entire building. The old, run-down station slowly transformed into one of the nicest travel stops in the area. Customers noticed immediately, so did competitors. Soon, larger companies started contacting me. Some wanted partnerships. Others wanted to purchase the property. Their offers shocked me. One company offered more money than I had earned in my entire life. I declined, then another offer arrived, even higher. I declined that one too. I hadn't sacrificed years of my life just to sell at the first opportunity. I believed the station's best days were still ahead, and I was right. By the 7th year, business had exploded. What once felt impossible was now reality. Hundreds of customers visited daily. The store needed additional employees. Then more employees, then managers. For the first time since buying the station, I wasn't working every shift myself. I finally had a team, a real team, people who believed in the business as much as I did. Meanwhile, something else began changing. My family. Suddenly, their tone toward me became very different. The criticism disappeared. The jokes vanished. The laughter stopped. Instead, I started hearing something I hadn't heard in years. Compliments. One Sunday afternoon, my mother called unexpectedly. "We drove by your station today," she said. "Oh, it looks amazing." I smiled slightly. "Thanks." There was an awkward pause. Then she added something I never expected. "We're proud of you." The words should have felt wonderful. Instead, they felt complicated, because where had that pride been when I needed it most? Where had it been during those lonely years? Where had it been when everyone called me a failure? Still, I thanked her politely. A few weeks later, my father stopped by the station. He walked through the store slowly, observing everything, the renovated interior, the busy checkout lines. The full parking lot, the smiling employees, I could see the surprise on his face. Finally, he turned toward me. "You built all this?" I nodded, "Yeah." For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he shook his head. "I honestly didn't think you'd make it." The admission stung more than I expected, not because it was cruel. Because it was honest. He really hadn't believed in me. Not once, not during the hardest years, not when I needed encouragement. Never, yet here he was, standing inside the business he once called irresponsible, looking around in disbelief. Later that year, the biggest surprise came from my brother Michael, the same brother who spent years mocking me, the same brother who called the station a joke. One evening, he invited me to dinner. That alone was unusual. Michael rarely initiated anything. During the meal, he seemed unusually nervous. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I've been thinking, dangerous habit." I joked. He laughed awkwardly. Then he leaned forward. "I was wondering if you'd be interested in a business partnership." I nearly choked on my drink. A partnership with me. For years, Michael had treated my business like a punchline. Now he wanted in. I couldn't help noticing the irony. Apparently, the station wasn't such a terrible investment anymore. I politely told him I'd think about it, but inside, I already knew my answer. Success was changing how people saw me. Yet something felt wrong. The more successful I became, the friendlier everyone acted. The relatives who ignored me now wanted conversations. The family members who mocked me now praised my determination. The people who once predicted failure suddenly spoke as though they had always supported me. But I remembered every joke, every insult, every dismissive comment, every moment they made me feel small. Money hadn't changed the past, success hadn't erased those memories, it had simply revealed something important. Many people support you after you succeed. Very few support you while you're struggling, and that lesson would become incredibly important. Because my greatest test wasn't making money, it wasn't growing the business, it wasn't becoming successful. My greatest test was deciding what to do when the very people who once laughed at me suddenly wanted a place at my table. And that decision would lead to the most unforgettable family reunion of my life. 10 years after buying the gas station, my life looked completely different. What had started as a rundown property on the edge of town had grown into something far bigger than I ever imagined. I no longer owned just one station, I owned several. The profits from the first location had allowed me to purchase neighboring land, invest in additional properties, and expand into new markets. I employed dozens of people, and had built a company that generated more revenue in a month than the original station earned in an entire year. The business magazines that once ignored me were now requesting interviews. Local newspapers called me a success story. Young entrepreneurs asked for advice. The same people who once questioned my judgment now praised my vision. But none of that felt as important as the invitation sitting on my desk. A family reunion. My aunt was organizing a huge gathering to celebrate my grandparents' anniversary. Nearly everyone in the family would be there, my parents, my brother Michael, the cousins, the uncles, the relatives who had laughed, the relatives who had doubted, the relatives who had called me a hopeless failure. For a moment I considered not going. After all, I was busy. I had meetings, business obligations, more than enough reasons to decline. But deep down I knew I needed to attend, not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted closure. The reunion was held at a large banquet hall outside town. As I walked inside, conversations immediately stopped. Heads turned. People noticed me almost instantly. I wasn't wearing anything flashy, just a simple suit, yet the atmosphere felt different. Years ago, I had entered family gatherings feeling judged. This time I entered feeling observed. Relatives hurried over to greet me. People who hadn't called in years suddenly acted like old friends. Several cousins asked for business advice. One uncle spent 10 minutes telling everyone how he had always believed in me. I nearly laughed. Always believed. I remembered his exact words when I bought the station. Financial suicide. Funny how success rewrites people's memories. The biggest surprise came when I saw my father. He was standing near the stage talking with several relatives. The moment he noticed me, a huge smile appeared on his face. He walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. "There he is." I smiled politely. "Good to see you, Dad." Then something unexpected happened. He turned toward the group and proudly announced, "This is my son, Daniel, the businessman I've been telling everyone about." The relatives applauded. The same family that once laughed at me. The same people who treated my dream like a joke. For a brief moment, I simply stood there listening. The applause continued, then faded. Then silence settled over the room. Everyone was smiling, waiting for me to say something. I slowly looked around at the faces, at the people, at the family members who had witnessed every stage of my journey. And suddenly, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. Years earlier, I had imagined this moment differently. I imagined proving them wrong. I imagined embarrassing them. I imagined making them feel the same humiliation they made me feel. But standing there now, none of that mattered. Success had already done the talking. I didn't need to hurt anyone. I simply needed to tell the truth. So I stepped forward. "Thank you," I said. The room became quiet. "I appreciate the kind words." Several people nodded. Then I continued, "But I'd like to share something." The smiles began to fade. When I bought my first gas station, I was terrified. The room remained silent. I invested everything I had. I looked toward my father, then toward Michael, then around the room. And honestly, I hoped my family would support me. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Instead, people looked down. Because they knew what was coming. I didn't need money. My voice remained calm. I didn't need investors. I paused. I just needed encouragement. The silence grew heavier. But most of what I received was criticism. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably. I was called irresponsible. Another pause. I was told I had ruined my future. I glanced toward one of my uncles. His face turned red. People laughed. The room felt frozen. For years, I had imagined this conversation with anger. Instead, I felt peace because I wasn't attacking anyone. I was simply reminding them of the truth. Then I smiled, but here's the interesting part. Everyone looked up. Those difficult years became the reason I succeeded. Confused expressions appeared. I continued. Every time someone said I couldn't do it, I worked harder. I looked around the room. Every joke became motivation. Another pause. Every doubt became fuel. Nobody interrupted. Nobody disagreed. Because they knew it was true, then I said the words that changed everything. So today I want to thank all of you. Several relatives looked shocked. Thank us, I nodded, yes. The room remained silent, because if everyone had believed in me, I might have become comfortable. A few people smiled nervously. But your criticism forced me to prove something. I looked toward my father, not with anger, not with resentment. Just honesty. It forced me to prove something to myself. My father's eyes filled with emotion. For the first time, I saw genuine regret. Not embarrassment, regret, the kind that comes when someone realizes they were wrong, very wrong. After a long silence, he stood up. His voice shook slightly. "Daniel." The entire room watched. "I owe you an apology. Nobody expected it. Neither did I. I should have supported you." His eyes glistened. "I should have believed in you." The room remained perfectly still. Then he said the words I had waited years to hear. I was wrong. The apology wasn't dramatic. It wasn't public humiliation. It wasn't revenge. It was something better. Accountability. real accountability, and in that moment, I finally understood something. The sweetest revenge isn't making people suffer. It's succeeding so completely that their doubt becomes meaningless. It's building a life so fulfilling that you no longer need validation. It's reaching a point where the people who once laughed can only stare in amazement at what you accomplished. As the reunion continued, conversations slowly resumed, but the atmosphere had changed. The truth had been spoken. The past had been acknowledged, and for the first time in a decade, I felt completely free. The old gas station that everyone mocked had given me more than wealth. It had given me confidence, purpose, independence, and a lesson I would never forget. Never let someone else's opinion become the limit of your potential. Because sometimes the dream everyone laughs at today becomes the success story they talk about tomorrow.